The Trudeau Liberals had a big announcement recently when they said that Canada would begin making its own vaccine right here in Canada at a Montreal plant this summer. Political reporter Brian Lilley has more of the details for us. Brian, when the Liberals say summer, what they really mean is what, maybe the end of the year?
December. I'm not sure when December became part of Canada's summer, but it was an odd announcement. Prime Minister Trudeau came out and announced something I wished he'd announced months ago at the beginning of this pandemic. We will make our own vaccines right here in Canada. Well, he kind of announced that once before when he announced the deal with China that fell apart 3 days after it was announced, but I digress. Now he's saying we've signed a deal with a company called Novavax, and they're going to come in and take over this plant that we're building and produce their vaccine here in Canada. And he really made it sound like it would be this summer. He said, oh, the plant will be finished this summer. Okay, well, when's vaccine production going to start? Reporters were asking. He's like, very vague. He was hemming and hawing. He said, well, you should ask the ministers up in the next news conference. So guess what reporters did? They asked the ministers. And Industry Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne said, oh, yeah, by the end of the year. So we're talking December before vaccine doses start rolling out from this. We're supposed to have everyone who wants a vaccine vaccinated by the end of September. The idea that this is somehow going to change things is a non-starter. Will it be ready for the next pandemic? Maybe. Will it be ready for something else? Maybe. But this is not going to be the silver bullet that gets us out of the awful COVID life that we've all been living since last March of openings, closings, restrictions, social distancing, and all of that. It's simply not going to happen.
Well, let me ask you something. When will Health Canada actually approve the vaccine?
Well, that's an unknown as well. So they signed this deal with Novavax. It's number 5 in line. We've approved 2 out of the 7 vaccines that we have signed contracts with their manufacturers, Pfizer and Moderna. And of course, we'll probably talk about delivery problems with them at some point, but Novavax just applied to Health Canada to have their vaccine approved for use. Their clinical trials are just wrapping up. So they're in line behind AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson. They're not ready. I'm not sure why we didn't secure a contract with AstraZeneca to make it at a plant in Toronto or Quebec City, or there are plants in Montreal. I was speaking with the former CEO of GlaxoSmithKline, a guy named Paul Lucas. Maybe you saw the op-ed that he wrote in Financial Post a while ago. It's made the rounds online in a tremendous fashion because he just said, look, this idea that we can't produce vaccines in Canada simply isn't true. We could. And he told me that we would be able to produce one of these other vaccines in Canada. Unfortunately, we're not doing that. And this new plan that we're doing is going to take almost a full year to come to fruition.
Now, Brian, making vaccines right here in Canada, Canadian-made product, is becoming more and more important as we deal with what's being dubbed as vaccine nationalism. Do we need to worry now that the EU may be blocking vaccine exports the way the United States is?
Absolutely. And I think this is part of why the Prime Minister came out and made this announcement when he did, because the European Union late last week brought in what they said it's not an export ban. And if you called it that, they would call up and they'd say, Hal, don't call it a ban. It's not an export ban. It's an export control. What's the difference? Well, they're not necessarily going to stop Canada from getting our doses, but they could at any moment. And that's the problem. I'll grant the Prime Minister this and International Trade Minister Mary Ng. They immediately called their European counterparts and said, this is a problem. We have placed orders. We're paying for this vaccine. We need to get it. The European leaders said, oh, yeah, don't worry. This is not going to affect Canada. Okay, if it's not going to affect Canada, why aren't we on the list of countries that are exempt from these controls? Instead, we're not. We are on the list of countries that could be impacted. And while the European Union will say nice words, as soon as one of their member states, could be Germany, could be France, could be Italy, turns around and says, hey, we're not getting our fair share. Why are you shipping to Canada? Guess what? We are going to be out of luck. There are no written guarantees. There are no conditions. And by the way, yes, we have a free trade deal with the European Union. This is exempt. It was written specifically into the agreement that this very type of thing, which we probably thought would never happen, this is exempt.
Now, you've been very critical of the Trudeau government's vaccine program, saying it's leaving us in kind of a bad spot. Where was Canada in vaccinating its population then, and where are we now?
Now, 2 weeks ago, when I really started tracking this, we were at 12th in the world. And I published it at the time. I said 12th in the world just isn't good enough for Canada. You know, we're supposed to be a leading country. We're a G7 country. Well, by this past weekend, when I wrote a column for the Toronto Sun, we were down to 23rd. So we're a G7 country, we're a top 10 economy, and we were 23rd in the world and falling because we got 0 Pfizer vaccines last week, 0 Moderna vaccines, and this week, as we get both Pfizer and Moderna, they're cut significantly. Pfizer by more than 80% and Moderna by 22%. So provinces are having a scramble and they simply don't have doses to put into arms. Guess what, Hal? Now we're at 30th and falling. We could be at 40 soon, the way things are going, because we're simply not getting the doses. We do not have the vaccines. And this threat from the EU that's putting us at risk, let me tell you, it is keeping provincial leaders in charge of the vaccine rollout up at night. So too is the fact, by the way, I should add this, that on Tuesday, the federal government, which runs a website that tells the provinces and the public when we will be getting doses of a certain vaccine, they removed the shipment for Moderna for the week of February 22nd through 28th. There were shipment details down there. Those have since been removed, which is exactly what happened when Pfizer stopped shipping. That has people concerned as well.
Now, according to some recent polls on the issue of vaccine rollout, who is really responsible for the shortfall the Canadians are experiencing right now? Are they blaming the Trudeau Liberals? Or maybe we're blaming the provinces?
Well, rightly, they're blaming the federal government at a rate of about 55% across the country, and then it depends on where you are, whether it's, up to 60% or more. But very few are blaming the provinces, which is accurate. It's how it should be. The federal government is responsible for buying the vaccine, getting it to the provinces. Once it's inside Canada, then it's up to the provinces. And you'll remember in early January, you and I talked, and there were problems with the vaccine rollout. Some of the provinces being slow. Alberta, not one of them, by the way. Alberta, their problem now is they were going so fast, believing that the supply would keep coming, because that's what they were assured, that now they're having to deal with in ration doses. That's what Quebec is having to do. Ontario has revamped its program 3 times. So this is because the federal government is not delivering. And the number of people seeing this as a problem for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals is increasing, which is bad news if your name is Justin Trudeau.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, Brian, says he's ready for an election if one is called. Apparently they paid off some of their debt from the previous elections. Tory leader Aaron O'Toole says he's also ready. But what about Justin Trudeau? Is he ready? Will an election be called this spring?
Well, all of them say that they don't want an election right now, and the only one that most people don't believe is Justin Trudeau. So sure, the NDP paid off their debts from the last campaign, but they still don't have a lot of money to run an election. The Conservatives would like more time to introduce their leader. The Trudeau Liberals, they're hoping that they can follow in the footsteps of governments in New Brunswick, in British Columbia, in Saskatchewan, go to the polls and get a big majority government instead of this minority that they're living in. To a degree, the Trudeau Liberals have seen a bounce in terms of voter approval of the job they're doing, and we've seen that for political leaders across the country when it comes to how they handle the vaccine. It's a bit like in the United States, everyone rallies to the president in time of war. In times of pandemic, Canadians are rallying to their leaders. So he's got a bit of a bounce there, but not necessarily enough to get a majority government at this point. It's touch and go. So here's my analysis. If the vaccine rollout from the federal government continues to be problematic, if there continue to be delays in delivery between now and the spring, we will not be seeing an election. If there are lots of shots going into arms and Canadians are feeling good about the vaccine program, then I think the government will find a way to make sure that it falls, to go to the polls, even if it's just going to the next Governor General, whoever that may be, and asking for a dissolution of Parliament, because the government is always allowed to do that at any point and it would be rare for the Governor General to say no, except under extenuating circumstances.
You know, what's interesting, Brian, is the fact that on paper, the Trudeau Liberals have a minority government, but with the NDP propping them up all the time, do they not have a majority government? Think about it.
In many ways, they do. And they've also had the support of the Conservatives during the pandemic because Canadians don't want to see politicians playing political games when it comes to support for people who've been thrown out of work for no fault of their own. They're thrown out of work because of government decree. So, it gets frustrating for me because now and again, the Prime Minister will try and blame the opposition and say, well, they don't really want this or they fought this on that. No, the only thing any of the opposition parties have done is tried to make the relief programs that exist for Canadians better. And I say that about all the parties, including the Bloc Québécois. They've all made good, concrete solutions. And if the government had listened to more of them, things might be even better.
In many regions of the United States, restrictions are finally being lifted to try and help stimulate the economy there. Now, here in Alberta, beginning February 8th, more restrictions will be lifted, such as allowing 6 people per table at a restaurant or a cafe, along with one-on-one training with a fitness instructor. But where you are in central Canada, restrictions are not being lifted to the same degree. Tell me more.
Well, Quebec has just started to lift some restrictions, and so next week they will allow people to go into hair salons and museums, and schools will be open. And we'll have schools back open here in Ontario, but we still don't have restaurants open. We're still under a stay-at-home order. That may change next week. But, you compare that to the United States, Hal. It's not just Florida that's opening up. Gavin Newsom, the Democratic governor of California, has started to open up his state. He lifted the stay-at-home order. Andrew Cuomo, Democrat governor of New York, he said indoor dining can start on February 14th. How's that for pressure, guys? Not only is it Valentine's Day, but nobody's been in a restaurant in months, so getting a table is at an even bigger premium that night. So all these things are happening, but across Canada, people are just not comfortable with the idea of opening things back up. A poll done by Campaign Research looked at this, and there are more people who think that there should be increased restrictions rather than no restrictions at all. And that includes 43% in Alberta who aren't happy with the fact that the Kenney government is relaxing restrictions, and they'd like to see an increase. So, this is the way it's going across the country. A lot of people say either things are good with the way they are, keep them, or increase restrictions. And across the country, that tends to be higher than either loosen restrictions or the smallest group, which is get rid of them all right now.
So many of the business owners who we've chatted with on Bridge City News are saying, no, you got to lift these restrictions. You got to let us open up or we're going to be going under. That's the bottom line. So many of the small business owners are hurting across the country. Now, speaking of business, let's talk about big business with more pipelines in the news. And these ones threaten the supply of oil and gas in Ontario and Quebec. Brian, will the possible shutdown of Line 5 or Line 3 resonate with people in Ontario and Quebec?
Not until they're freezing in their homes and their cars won't run. This is not resonating in this part of the country yet, and I don't think that it will. People in central Canada just don't see the connection between oil and gas from Western Canada and the pampered life that they lead, the worn home that they have. Natural gas, it heats about 78% of the homes in Ontario. There's a large portion in Quebec, and throughout rural Quebec, it's propane, which was, the rail blockades, if you remember that, that only became an issue, a huge issue for a lot of people when heating their homes with propane was threatened. So unfortunately, I don't see this resonating with people yet because they don't make the connection. They still just think pipeline, dirty oil from Alberta. And not everyone. I want you to understand that there are a lot of people in Eastern Canada that do support Canada's oil and gas industry. But those opposed to it, who wanted Keystone shut down, who didn't want Northern Gateway, who fought against Energy East, they won't care about this until they are freezing in their homes and their cars won't run.
Brian, we only have about a minute left here. It's been a couple of weeks since Julie Payette resigned as Governor General. Now you say taxpayers will still be on the hook for paying Ms. Payette for some time to come.
Yeah, well, she is going to get that pension, and it looks like she will still have access to that up to $100,000 a year in expenses. I've also been told that she may not be fully moved out of her home yet. I mean, she hasn't lived at Rideau Hall since she's been Governor General. She was staying at a smaller home on the property, and that may sound, crazy, but if you haven't been to Rideau Hall, maybe you don't understand how big the grounds are and how many buildings there are. The Prime Minister lives on the grounds. Several other people do as well. She's still living there. She's moving out. She's going to be getting her pension, and we're going to have to pay for those extra expenses for many years to come.
To have a pension like that, we can only dream. Toronto Sun columnist and political reporter Brian Lilley, thanks again for joining me today.
Thank you, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks for watching.